I'm Tracy again, and the IFE in Puerto Rico, the International Financial Entity, right? This quasi offshore, but not really offshore banking structure, which is popular, has always been popular. And in recent years, the OCIF in Puerto Rico has repeatedly sort of moved the goalposts, right? And made it progressively, I guess, more difficult to get the license. I think there's, after initially where you had a series of banks that were basically like shell money laundering operations, there were changes, but now there's this drive to even create more of an air of legitimacy for these banks. And like, I've always been a big fan of them because the scope of what you can do, right, and even the cost is really great. And, the permitted activities range from any, function of banking all the way down the line to securities and some element of like crypto custody, stuff like that. It's really, really broad. And, the nature of Puerto Rico as a territory of the U.S. makes the IFE not deemed to be an offshore bank, even though, for all intents and purposes, it is, right? So when you're talking about FBAR and bank reporting and all that kind of stuff, you don't have to do it with an account if you bank with an IFE because it's Puerto Rico. It's not Antigua. So that's always been the advantage, right? And then, you have the tax holiday where you're paying, like an effective rate of 3% and all that kind of stuff. But with semi recently, they've upped the ante a little bit, right? Well, actually, a lot. So, what was a very low capital requirement with basically no blocked capital elements to it has changed. So now you're looking at a minimum of 10 million paid in capital. Okay. And paid in capital is effectively your founder's interest into the entity, right? And as I've explained before, much like you see national associations, Bank of America, NA, here in the US, you have kind of a specialized banking entity in Puerto Rico. And so your first step in getting the license is this application for a permit to organize, right, to create the entity. So what they want to see, the OCIF does at the approval of that permit, is that there's paid in capital, right, contributions for your founder's shares in that entity equal to 10 million or above, in certain cases up to their discretion, which I've never really seen, but it's possible. And they've loosened what can constitute or what is required in terms of that paid in capital. Obviously, cash, marketable securities, crypto, and even in some cases real estate, right? It all sort of case by case on the real estate, but you can do it. And it doesn't have to be like from one person, it's just collectively who's going in there. And that isn't blocked capital, right? That's like what you're contributing to the company for your founder shares, and the return of that capital can be paid out effectively at any time. But you have to show it at some, point fairly midway through the process. And it can be held, it doesn't necessarily have to be held by the banking entity itself. It can be held or maintained in like your account if you're a promoter, officer, director, and then handled through like a pledge agreement, right? I'm pledging X amount upon this, for my founder shares of whatever it is. So it's not that you need $10 million that's going to be stacked away you'll never see. But on top of that, then they added, the OCIF did, a $1 million like deposit, right? And that has to stay on account with another bank in Puerto Rico. So basically, your IFE bank has to go open a bank account and stock away $1 million. And that million has to sit there, right? Which, yes, somebody has to contribute that. It has to sit there. But as you conduct banking operations, it doesn't mean that, profits, funds from deposits, stuff like that can't supplant the money that the promoters had to put into that 1 million, so they can receive their capital back, and then you just have this sort of ongoing deposit, right? Now that can be tricky depending on the operations and kind of how you're going about it, but it doesn't mean that it's your $1 million stuck in Puerto Rico for eternity, right? So that is obviously a higher impediment. Like, you don't see that really in many, if any, offshore jurisdictions, right? Because you have such minimal capital adequacy tests and controls. But Puerto Rico, I think, in a drive to create more legitimacy around the IFE, also make it easier for IFEs, or at least optically make it easier for IFEs to obtain access to the Federal Reserve, which is possible, albeit very difficult. That's probably the reason behind it. But outside of that application, it's really the same thing. They tightened up a little bit on local presence in terms of how many employees and all that. It used to be exemptions where you could get down to 2. Those are largely gone. You can look at 4, but it's never a significant cost there because you don't need anybody of high sea level adequacy to take those positions. So those are the the semi-recent parameters for the IFE in Puerto Rico. Still like one of the best offshore structures you can get, primarily because of the relationship connectivity to the U.S. and also then obviously tax, but also because the scope of permitted activities is wildly broad, right? It's sort of this 3-in-1 kind of license, which is great. So it is worth the investment. Obviously, it's a significant investment, or at least significant proof of funds. And, you go from there. So if you have any questions concerning Puerto Rico IFE, definitely hit me up. You know where to find me. I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.